Hey everybody, today in our first full video on Code with Martin, we're going to be finishing off an incomplete project of mine called Deux-Titres. It's a play on the French term sous-titres, which means subtitles, like the subtitles you would have at the bottom of a movie or a TV show. I have a description here, a simple service which converts subtitle files in one language, like all subtitle files, into subtitle files with two languages simultaneously. So let's say you're a language learner, the learner of a second language. You may want to watch a French movie, or watch a German movie, or watch whichever language movie. And at the same time as having French subtitles, you may want English subtitles to ease your understanding of what people are saying at any point. I know it's definitely an application that I would benefit from, or which I would enjoy using. So here I've given a little diagram of how this idea will work. We're going to take catalog information, so movie and TV show and episode information, and the contents of subtitles files from a service called the Open Subtitles API. We're going to ingest, or we're going to import that information on demand into our web application, and then we will use the open source project, our own hosted instance of the open source project, LibreTranslate. Now this takes the place of a very expensive translation service. I believe AWS has a service where you can pay them per request and they'll translate some text. We will host it ourselves and have our own service which we can send a request to, and then it will respond back in a different language. And then, of course, the last part of this diagram is the user is going to be consuming those subtitles, consuming the result of this service, not using some hosted web player on our website or not using some streaming service, but using their own media player. In my case, it would be VLC. Another person may choose to use QuickTime or choose to use Windows Media Player, however they choose to use it at their convenience. Now, which tools will we be using to build this project, or to finish off this project? My favorite, Laravel. It's a PHP web application framework. Now, forgive the overly simplistic explanation, but I want to make this video accessible to people of all experiences and of all knowledge levels on this particular subject of web development. Laravel includes functionality like routing. Now, this allows the website to have more than one web page and allows it to do more than one thing. It also allows us to interact with the database in a consistent and secure way. We store information in the database. Laravel gives me an easy way to get that information out. The technical term is an ORM, Object Relationship Mappings. It also allows us to queue jobs. That's simply Laravel will perform resource intensive and long duration tasks in the background so that the user can continue navigating around the web pages, and something intensive like running through a large subtitle file and translating it piece by piece and then putting it back together and allowing them to download the result of that process. It does all of that in the background. The next piece of functionality it offers us is WebSockets. Now, when those jobs are done, we want to get in touch with the user interface which the user is navigating. We want to let the user know that their conversion, their translation request, is completed and ready to be picked up. Authentication. Another feature Laravel gives us, a very simple feature. It keeps track of who's logged in. And that's about it for what we'll be using from Laravel as a very powerful project. Now, my own preference is to use Visual Studio Code, VS Code, as we often call it, as a code editor, as a text editor. You'll see that here. Here's my instance of VS Code, customized a little bit. There we go. I also use Laravel Herd. Now, this is a very convenient tool offered by the Laravel team. It allows us to manage a very simple development environment for Nginx. Now, that's our web server, the server that serves our web pages. PHP. Now, that's a server-side language we'll be using to code most of this application. And Node.js. This allows us to use React and other front-end tooling to create a responsive and useful user interface for our users. You'll see that here, the little H in the menu bar. Now, DB Engine, that's similar to Laravel Herd, but it allows us to use a simple development environment for databases. So rather than spending quite some time going through installers, command line installers, all of these complicated things, just to get a database set up and configured, it gives us another little window in the menu bar. I can create a MySQL database and a Redis database with one click. You'll see here. Now I'll be using MySQL for long-term persistent storage of information, who people are, their languages, the subtitle conversions, information about the files that have been converted, all these things which I want to keep for long term, I'll keep in MySQL. And for very fast to access, short-term accessible storage of information, I use Redis. The technical term for this is a cache, a short-term store of information which we can get at very quickly. OrbStack. Now this is an alternative, a fast and easy to use alternative for the Docker desktop product. A Docker desktop is the macOS application which lets us use Docker as a development environment. I've given a very simple because I know it can be complicated. Docker, I've given a very simple explanation of what Docker is and how it works. Using Docker is like using a recipe. Even if you eat part of a cake or give a dish to someone else, I still have the instructions to make that same dish again in its original state. Docker containers, the things we create using Docker, are like virtual computers created using those same instructions. If we mess up one of them, we mess up one of these computers, one of these virtual systems, or we break them, we don't need to worry. We can recreate them using the same instructions. Or in this case, we may want to have more than one identical copy of a container, of a system, for more performance. Two men working on a task would of course be more performant, more easy, more helpful than a single person working on a task. We can create multiple using the same instructions. I hope that's a good description of the tasks that we're going to be, of the tools that we're going to be using in this project. Now here's a very simple explanation of the database structure. It's a very, very simple database structure, and it's expressed in the Laravel ORM as a series of classes, of models, as Laravel chooses to call them: feature, subtitle, and subtitle conversion. Now the feature is the movie or TV show episode, and we identify it using information from the Open Subtitles API. Subtitle, that's a piece of information about an original subtitle file associated with a feature in its original language. So let's say a feature may be a certain episode of Family Guy, for example. Subtitle would be a description of the English language subtitle file for that episode of Family Guy. Now, subtitle conversion is the last type of information here. Now, it's information about a conversion of the subtitle file into different languages. So, to give an example, if the subtitle is the English subtitle of episode 1 of Family Guy, a subtitle conversion may be the conversion of that file into English and French. So a subtitle conversion would point to English and French in a subtitle file translated using the Libre Translate project. Now the first thing I'm going to do is rebuild an image of and create a container of our Libre Translate service. Again, from a moment ago, this is an open source service which allows us to translate text from one language to another. Of course, how many languages we choose to support the translation of depends on how many resources we want to give, how much money we want to pay for servers which we can host this service on. So I've copied the Docker file which this project has provided us and renamed it custom.docker file. I've done this and I've written a series of commands here which we will run to build the image and to create the container, because I thought the instructions on the Libre Translate website aren't very clear and aren't very easy to understand, in my personal opinion. This is the original Docker file from the repository that you'll find on the Libre Translate website. I have modified it very slightly, and that's by changing this line here so that only simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, English, French, Spanish, German, Arabic, Japanese, and Russian are supported, because I determined that these may be the most commonly used languages on this service. So to simplify it and to ensure that we're only storing on the server the files that we need to store on it, I've restricted just how many models are downloaded when we create this image. Now, this ominous eye-looking icon in my menu bar is for Obstack. This is the Docker container alternative I talked about earlier on. I deleted the image and I deleted the container so that I could demonstrate this process to you. Now the first command I'm going to run is docker buildx build -t. Now this is the tag or the name of the image so that we can reference it later on. You'll see here is where we reference it. It can be any name. I've called it translate for obvious reasons. And we're going to give the path of the Docker file, of the set of instructions to construct this image. And the dot at the end indicates that the current directory should be the directory that we're currently in, if that makes sense. So let's copy. Let's go to our terminal of choice. Mine is Warp. And you'll see this is where we are. Now, if you choose to do so, you could open a terminal in VS Code. But that isn't my preference, so we're going to stick with this one. So let's run our command. See, that was fast. That's the benefit of using OrbStack over the Docker desktop application. Now let's run our second command. Now this is docker run. It runs an instance, a container of that image, of that description of LibreTranslate. Now we're going to call it translate-dev-01 because you can have multiple of these containers to increase the capacity of this translation service. I'm going to instruct it. Always hate these tooltips that come up when you hover over text. But the next option I've chosen is when or if to restart the container. Think of it like a computer, when to start or turn off a computer. We're going to use the option unless stopped. That means unless I choose manually and intentionally to stop this container, it should restart. So let's say if something breaks or there's an error or it crashes for whichever reason, Docker will attempt to restart this system unless I choose to stop it manually. The next option I'm picking here, M file. Now, these .m files you may see in a lot of projects contain environment-specific configuration and secrets for a project. And by configuration, you may want different settings for a project based on where it's being used. In development, we may choose a different URL, a different address for a website than in production. Secrets, which you would put in a .m file, include passwords and API tokens and this sort of thing that you don't want to be publicly visible. Say, if there was a password in this file, I certainly wouldn't want to hard code it into this command because that would be visible to the viewers of this video. Now, in this specific case, there aren't any passwords or any secrets in this file, but it's still good practice to keep your projects and your code secure. Volume. Now, this isn't very obvious, but this option configures where on my file system, where in my tree of folders on my computer, I would like it to store data, store information for the long term. This is configured as I'd like it to be configured. There's a second location where I want it to store information. This is specific to the database within the LibreTranslate system. Now the second to last option here, it configures that port 5000. Now this is an entry, think of it as an entryway and an exit way, as an input and an output from this system. It's a closed off box except for this one point where things can go in and out of the system. Now that point can be addressed, it can be referred to using the number 5000 for things going in and for things coming out. Now, the last setting, the last configuration is translate. Again, I for image is a reference to the image that we've just created. Now, if I open OrbStack, we should see that the last command created an image. It's 2.82 gigs. It says it was created a week ago. Not so sure about that. But let's go about running this command. See what happens. There we go. It's created it. Now I'll tell you, I have cheated a little here. Because I've already created this Docker image and container in the past, I've stored, I've retained the information, the data that it downloads as part of this process, because I didn't want to wait unnecessarily for this command to complete processing. When you run this command, or if you ran a similar Docker run command, you would find you may be waiting for, maybe up to 10 minutes or long duration, and that's not out of the ordinary. You don't need to cancel the command or anything like that. That's pretty typical. But in this case, I'm showing one that I made earlier, as I say on the cooking shows. So we have a container using the name, using the tag which we gave it in the command. Port 5000 is open. It mounts to this computer. The information could be stored in 2 places on this computer. And let's see. Ooh, localhost was denied. We can't get to port 5000. Now let's see why that is. Let's look in the dev.env and see if we've configured it. Disable if we've configured it to be available using the web user interface. LT host, that means it's available to all hosts, like localhost refers to the computer this is currently running on, my own computer. 5000 is the port that we've configured, so that works. Debug is true. That gives us more information in the logs, which we wouldn't want excessive information in the logs when we're in production because it would fill up the text files very quickly. Metrics, I don't need additional metrics. I'm the only person using it right now. Disable web UI. Now, as this setting is set to false, I would expect it to be available for it not to be disabled. LT disable files translation, that's not something we need to worry about. That's basically saying you can't use the web UI to drag or upload a whole file for translation. We're just going to be making requests using the API to translate small pieces of text one at a time. So, most of the job, in my experience, most of the job of a developer, of a software engineer or website engineer is encountering error messages and then using your intellect, using your intuition to find the cause of the error message. That really is most of the job. So let's see. I do wonder. No, 8080 isn't the port we need. I wonder, because our application, I'll give you a tour of it in a moment, is available at Deux-Titres.test. I wonder if this website, the web UI of the Libre Translate service, is also only available using that host name, using that URL. Nope, it was denied. Let's try something. Let's try to rebuild the whole thing again. Again, this is a big part of the job. Just try over, and try over again. And eventually you get there. And honestly, if this level of obsessing over a task until you found a way to deal with it, if that's not what you fancy, if that's not your wheelhouse, perhaps another job would be more suitable, because this really is the whole thing. Find error message, try to fix error message. it's interesting, and obviously your ability to solve a problem, to resolve an error, improves as you have more and more experience with these systems and their tendencies. So I've deleted the volumes, deleted the images, deleted the containers. Let's try again. That was fast. I suspect this one will be less fast. Of course, if it takes a while, I will use some movie magic to ensure that it speeds up in your case. Oh no, that's suspiciously fast. I suspect the reason it's ran so quickly is because the downloading of the models here as part of the image building process, the downloaded files were cached. So I do suspect that's why it's running so quickly. Now let's have a look. Sweet. Oh, it's doing something. My browser is giving me hints of life. Nope. I do wonder. We know the web user interface doesn't seem to be working. Libra Translate also offers an API, and that's what we're using to power the app. So for now, let's open Postman. I should be logged in. But so let's open Postman and try to make a web request. We can use this Postman project, with this Postman product, which lets you make HTTP requests to services. I have the Postman extension inside VS Code, which lets me use it in line alongside my code. Let's make a request to the service and see if we can get a response. All right. I paused the video a moment there so that I could authenticate with Postman. Now, here are a few requests I made earlier. We would try to send one. Here I have a example piece of text which I believe I copied from an American website. I think the Library of Congress website. I just copy pasted an example passage. The source language from English. The target language is French. Libra Translate service is quite intelligent. It can infer, or it can predict which language the text is in, just as Google Translate is able to do. And then we send this additional configuration format. We're going to say this text may contain HTML tags, which many subtitle files actually do contain HTML tags so that they can display a person's name in bold or a little description of someone's action in italics. Now let's try to send it. 403 forbidden. Exactly the same error we get when making a request to the web UI. Now, after some contemplation, I've realized that as this is an issue related to networking, there's always a possibility that our port 5000 is being used by a different service on this computer, and that the response we're getting of unauthorized may be coming from that other service. So a way to check that is to use the Warp Terminals AI has been quite helpful here, of completing the ls off command, a command that you should have available if you use a Unix-like operating system like Mac OS or Linux. And you can check if any service is using port 5000 here. Control C, I assume that means control center, and code helper, I know that's Code Helper because if I open Activity Monitor here we go. That's a part of the VS Code Electron set of processes which are used to render VS Code. So let's see. There we go. Control Center. From the icon, I can assume that has something to do with our little control center pane over here. As it's networking, perhaps it's something to do with AirDrop or something to do with my microphone. I have no idea. But it's obviously something that's activated since we last worked with this Libre Translate service. So I've deleted our container, kept our volumes, kept our image. Let's try and modify our command so that we're using a different port. Say 5003. Let's see if this works. There we go. Quickly created 5003. Now, if this works, of course it'll be joyous, but we will need to change how the app is configured to consume this API. Fingers crossed. Oh. Well, we're getting closer. 2000 okay, and that suggests that the response was performed successfully. But there's no response in the form of JSON. Hey! It's just Postman being playful. We have translated text from English to French. Hallelujah. Now we can actually get started finishing this project. Here we go. Deux-Titres. We're on a branch called Basic Catalog. In this branch, we will complete the catalog functionality, which is this here. Currently, the order, these call to action buttons, the buttons which we are advertising our services using and which we want to draw people's attention to when they visit our page, are in a certain order. The second button, the button which isn't yet fully implemented, gives you a little tooltip saying that the functionality will be available soon. And when you click on it, nothing happens. Currently, the call to action, the highlighted button, sends the user down the workflow of uploading their own subtitle file. Now, it would be very convenient if we didn't have to require the user to upload their own file. If we could just allow them to type in the name of a TV show or the name of a movie which they'd like to consume using dual subtitles. So that's what we're doing in this branch. We flipped the call to action buttons around. Now uploading your own subtitle file is a second option, a secondary option. This page, now we're consuming information about popular movies, or at least movies for which accessing the subtitles of those movies is popular, if that makes sense. So not necessarily the most popular movies, but the most popular subtitles for a movie, and the same just below this search box, which isn't yet implemented. Here we can see popular TV shows. We can click through, Black Mirror TV show. Now, all of this information about episodes and about the poster image and the title and the year of the show, this is all consumed using the Open Subtitle API. You see here. Get subtitles, and I have the structure of a typical response for this API endpoint commented out so that our AI coding tool, Copilot, can understand or at least approximate the structure of a response so that it can work with it and assist me. Now, I'm skeptical somewhat of the quality of much of the AI code tooling. Perhaps you have your own experience. Feel free to chat about it in the comments, your own experience with these tools. I found in trying it out, it was helping me enough with at least repetitive tasks that I pulled the trigger. I purchased the £80 annual plan of GitHub Copilot. So I have this tool for a year at least, and I might as well make the most of it. And I'm sure you'll see. I can turn it on and off. Enable. Here we go. GitHub Copilot. You see I have so many extensions for VS Code turned on. This is an interesting one. Enable power mode. That's quite fun. But so as not to frustrate your viewing, I will disable it. And another great one is power header. Now this automatically inserts a copyright statement, or more generally a header of a certain template, customizable by the language type of the file, at the top of the page. And whenever you make a change to this, you notice the modified date here. Whenever you make a change, it will automatically update the modified date time timestamp, which is quite fun. So let's get going. You'll also see that much of this website, to the best of my ability, is localized, as this is a language related website. It's quite helpful that it's available to the largest audience who may use it to learn English, or English people who may use it to learn a different language. So the integration between Laravel's localization feature, which you see the implementation of here, isn't very smooth. In fact, it doesn't integrate at all with Laravel's integration of inertia. I wish it did, but for the meantime, I've created quite a hacky solution of just returning the localized strings themselves. Of course, this means that I lose out on much of the functionality around pluralization and around the concatenation of dynamic strings into localized strings. You'll notice this function here, extend localizations. I can append this array of shared localized language with localized strings which are specifically useful for an endpoint or for a particular view. So you see here on the catalog view, I may want to extend all of those shared strings with the translated strings for the word catalog and for the term for sentence, popular movies, popular TV shows. And you can quickly see the result of that when I switch languages using the header here. So it's doing a good enough job for now. And perhaps I'll even make that functionality, or more sophisticated, extensible version of that functionality, into a package for future use in other projects. Interesting ideas. So again, we click Simpsons. I can only imagine how many series there are by this point. Click at a episode. We have subtitles for different versions of the media by their language. We really want to, given that the Libre Translate service currently only allows us to translate from a small set of languages, the first thing we could do is limit which of these languages of the original media subtitles we allow a person to translate from, because there's little use taking the contents of a Farsi subtitles file and translating it into other languages if our translation service doesn't support translation from Farsi or Persian. So the first thing we could do is limit this. So let's investigate how we go about doing that. We're in the catalog controller. I want the show endpoint. A very quick and dirty way of checking if you're in the correct area of code to affect what you're trying to change is to add a DD statement, which is dump and dive, I believe, in the Laravel verbiage. Let's see. So show get cached available subtitle languages for potential feature. I like descriptive method names. Now, all this function does is, you see, it's public, as opposed to the method which we are calling within this method, which is private. That means that this function, this public function, is available to be called by other class files. This function, a private function, is not available. I could not, for example, call this function from catalog controller. It would tell us undefined method. Of course it is defined, but it's not visible to that file. So why have I created two methods to do the same thing? Well, this method here, get cached available subtitle languages for potential feature being a term to describe a feature which means a TV show, episode, or a movie from the Open Subtitles API, which is potential because it isn't yet, the information from the API isn't yet copied into a feature model inside our database. So it's a potential feature which someone may choose to make into an existing feature, into a feature in our database. So this function here caches the result of the API call. Now that's quite useful because Open Subtitles API is quite generous in the number of responses they allow and the number of requests on their API they will successfully serve, especially when searching through their catalog of IMDb and TMDB information about TV show episodes and movies. They're slightly less generous when it comes to serving you the contents of subtitles for a particular feature, as you can imagine, and we'll handle that later on. And eventually, when this site goes live, I suspect I will have to purchase access to that API. But here, just for reducing the amount of times we have to ask the API for information, and just for our own performance, we will choose to cache this information for 1 hour. Now we're using the Redis cache, which we discussed earlier, for short-term fast access. Now, what are we storing in the cache? We take a feature ID, which is this here. In the case of a TV show, this is the feature ID of the TV series. This is the feature ID of the TV series episode, which we selected. Feature ID. Interesting. See, this is a perfect example of how caching the information means that it doesn't have to. We don't have to reperform this function. So the DD didn't affect our previous selection of an episode because we'd already retrieved the subtitle language information for that episode. But when I select a different episode, it has to retrieve the information for the first time. So we get this number DD'd. Wonderful. Now we make the request. We use the same headers and contents for the request body, which we may use if we were using Postman or anything like this. Thankfully, Laravel gives us this wonderful HTTP facade, basically a very simple and easy to understand shim or facade on top of the Guzzle HTTP client, which I believe itself is a shim or a facade on top of the curl HTTP client. We send a API key, we send a user agent. These are two requirements of the Open Subtitles API. Now, because only one page of results, or the first page of results, is returned, I've wrapped this request to the API in a function called depaginate request. All this function does is take a callback, the callback which we provided. I can delete this, follow my own to-do comment. All this does is make the request, increase the page number, and then make another request after waiting around half a second to ensure that we're not, DDoSing, we're not continually making requests to the API, which they may perceive as abuse of their public API. And we accumulate all of the results into an array and return the array. So that's quite a helpful piece of functionality, which is reusable in this form, so that we can use it in other places where we may want all of the results and not just the first page of results. Now, providing null as the languages will return all of the subtitles regardless of language. So next, we're going to key each of these subtitles by their language, so that we have, as you'll see here, each of the subtitles by their language code. Now we have a package called here. We have a package called language code, which is quite useful. It does a decent job of mapping two character language codes like EN or FR or IT into their human-friendly name. Of course, for some episodes of the subtitles, for some subtitles, there are some two character language codes, which this package doesn't include, doesn't understand, or won't map. But they're quite, scarce examples which we can hard code ourselves if it becomes an issue or there's enough demand for those languages. So we take all of the language codes, the language codes of our subtitles, we get the intersection of them, of the names mapped from those language codes. We use the asort method, which sorts those languages alphabetically. I'm not sure how well that's doing here, as you can see, but you'll see something interesting. The asort method takes a array but it takes an array reference or reference of the array. So whenever a change is made, it's not as complicated as it looks. Whenever a change is made to the array which is passed into that method, it will be reflected by the array in the scope of this method. So basically, we're passing the actual variable from this scope, this function's scope, and not just the actual variable value, a copy of the variable's value, whose changes won't be reflected when we leave the scope of this method call. And that has the nice side effect of we don't need to do something like potential subtitle languages codes equals the result of this function. This variable itself will be affected. So wonderful. We're passing through the language codes or the subtitles keyed by their language codes and the language codes so that we can render this using the second part of the array, and we can render this using the first part of the array. Sweet. So that's these 3 lines explained. Eventually we will finish off this project, but I thought it was useful to explain the fundamentals. So for your interest, there we go. I'm not the smoothest keyboard operator. There we go. The second part of this array returned by this method is language codes mapped to their human-friendly name, and the first part is language codes mapped to their subtitles. And you see this is information returned by the Open Subtitles API. Now this variable here likely has children is basically a way of not returning a bunch of subtitles when we're looking at the TV show and not the TV show episode. So we don't want to get every subtitle for The Simpsons, we want to get every subtitle only once a person has selected an episode for The Simpsons. And obviously this doesn't apply if it's not a TV show. The only other case could be when it's a movie. So let's go. Catalog show. That's the inertia template which we're rendering here when we visit this URL. So show.tsx, we're using React and TypeScript as the languages for the front end of this project. You'll see that potential feature subtitles and available subtitle languages are used to render this UI. So please pick which media you have by the original language and file name. That's here. And we're just converting the object into an array containing the key and value, language code and subtitles, and we're using the .map functionality that's often used in React templates to create a hyperlink. So that's all self-explanatory by this point. Let's limit both of these to the available set of languages. Now we use a enum, a a relatively new PHP feature, an enumerable, to describe which languages we're able to translate to and from. So let's get all of the cases of these enums and then filter those language codes we saw earlier to only include the values of this enum. Now this is exactly a perfect example of duplicate functionality or of non-specialized functionality which could easily be performed by Copilot. So let's give it a go, see how well it does. Filter the available language code keys in potential and to the values of the enum values. Interesting. Let's see if this has worked. So GitHub Copilot does have an understanding of the code base of other files outside of the one that I'm running this suggestion on, because it was able to determine that there was a custom all cases method inside this enum class file without the class file being imported, and a easy way of importing the file when there's a little squiggly line underneath to say it hadn't been imported yet is to just delete the last letter and then press enter. You'll see it's now been imported. Because I'm a bit obsessive and habitual, I do like to sort my import statements by length, but of course that's just me being a bit obsessive. So let's see if this has worked. We can do it without using the DD statement. Let's just see if it changes the UI. No. Nope, that isn't what we want. See, this is why AI tools aren't going to take our jobs. I suspect that there were at least English subtitles. So, let's see. Personally, I would use and I'm sure it's not the most performant way of doing it. Nope. Yeah, before you criticize my speed of working, I will remind you that it's 2 in the morning. So, let's give it a go. Okay, reduce. I want to pass both the value, first of all, Is it callback first or array first? Array first. I want to see if the key is provided. Too few arguments. Okay, the key isn't provided. As suggested. Shut up, Copilot. I tried to give you a chance to do this job, and you haven't done this job. So please be quiet. Key use and pass a reference to the main object. Actually, let's keep that. Item equals potential sweet. Oh, wonderful. So now we can just do if in array needle. So nice having information in the IDE. Needle is the key, and because we don't want to call the function all cases of the enum every time we iterate through these loops, let's just get it once. Supported languages. Subtitle language enum all cases. And because we're not going to be making changes to it, but we don't want to increase the memory stack, we can also add it to the scope using the reference. Supported languages. Carry key equals item. I will add the item into this array, which will be carried with each iteration. Return carry. Now let's see if this has worked. Let's see if we're actually oh, that's hilarious. Maybe this is why the AI solutions weren't working. Case value. Here, that I suspect that was why the AI solutions weren't working. We were, if it's not obvious, we were comparing the string, the 2-character string of the language case, with the enum, with an instance of the enum, rather than with the value of the enum, which is the 2-character string. So if we just map all of the values out of that array of enums, then we have something like for like to compare with. So, wonderful. Now, because AI is really good at repetitive work, Bingo. Let's see if that works. Looks like it. We're getting somewhere. Wonderful. Arabic, English, French, German, Japanese, Italian, Russian, and Spanish. And the subtitles, an interesting feature to draw your attention to is this scroll MT20. You may see that when we click on a hyperlink, it's going to subtitles-JA, which is a anchor in the HTML document. Basically, you add a hash the name of the ID of an element, and it will scroll to that element. But the problem we have is if you scroll to -AR for Arabic, the AR would be underneath the heading because the heading is covering the top of the document. So a nice feature of Tailwind is that you can use the scroll MT, scroll margin top 20, which adds the scroll margin top 5 REM CSS declaration, and that just adds 20 times the spacing CSS variable, which is 5 REM, to the top of the scroll distance, which is quite nice. So that's that. Now if we click one of these, it will take us to the create dash and an ID, as you see in the bottom left corner here. That's the ID of the feature, I believe, but let's have a look. Here we go. Catalog.create. I'm using a package, a Laravel package called Laravel Localized Routes, which automatically transforms all of our catalog.create type routes. Let's see here, catalog.create. A route called catalog.create will be converted into en.catalog.create and fr.catalog.create. So you see here, the route that we're currently on would be it.catalog.show, but all we have to do is provide the catalog.show part of that route name. But obviously our React inertia frontend isn't aware of any of that functionality, so we need to provide it ourselves. We pass through the locale, the 2-character string in handle inertia requests. These are the serializable props which are passed through to every, delete this, which are passed through to every inertia template. Locale, just the current locale in the Laravel application. And we add that to the, we prefix that to the front of the route name. And then we pass in the, not the feature ID from the Open Subtitles API, but the file ID, the particular ID of the file. So let's see what happens when we click on it. This method which we need to complete. First, we're going to get the contents of the subtitle, which we're requesting from the Open Subtitles API, and then we're going to store those contents inside a file in the subtitle uploads folder. Now let's see what's inside this function. Of course, we're going to cache the response because the subtitle file, which is quite costly, and we can only request so many according to the quota of our API key. the subtitle file will only be available to us for 3 hours after making the first request. So we're either going to get the download link from our cache, or if it's the first time, we're going to get it from the API. You'll see here again, I've commented out a response, a typical response from the API so that our Copilot AI assistant can make use of it. They can understand the structure of the response at least. If there is a link, we forget the current cached value. I'm not quite sure if this is required. And then we remember the new link. We set the download link. We check again if the download link was empty, and then we return it from the function. It's quite simple. Now let's see if it's actually stored in our file storage, and then we can continue. Okay, doke. I want an English copy. Homer's Odyssey, and here we go. It is stored in our file system. Let's see if it's actually stored. Storage, app, private, subtitle upload. You'll see I've done a lot of testing. Now let's drag this into our IDE because it's, of course, a text file. Hey Otto, nice. Haven't watched The Simpsons for so many years. Yeah, wonderful. It's definitely The Simpsons. So let's store the model records so that we can refer to this information when we do our conversion later. Wonderful. I believe I copied this code from our subtitle controller. Store upload method. I'll take you through the whole flow of this subtitle controller so that you can understand it. First, we show a page which allows the user to upload their subtitle file. We have a process which stores, validates the request, takes the file, stores it in our file system, creates a subtitle model record, creates a conversion request, which is pending. We're not doing anything with it yet. Stores the file in the file system, updates those two models so that they have the path of the original media file, redirects them to the next page, which is the language selection page. You'll see in a moment what we're doing here. Basically, we attempt to convert the first 10 lines of subtitle. We take the first 10 lines and attempt to find the original language. So let's say if someone uploads a Arabic subtitle file, we will know use the Libre Translate services functionality for estimating the original language of a piece of text. Sometimes that takes the first 5 cues. If the first 5 cues of the subtitle file are like branding or copyright statements, it may require the first 10 cues. And then, as I say, we attempt to translate those. And then we show the language selection screen, which I will show you in a second. Once they've selected 2 languages, we will store the languages that they've selected, and we will start the process of converting those subtitles into those 2 languages. If one of the languages, which you'll see here. We chunk the parts of the subtitle file. See the subtitle file we had open a moment ago. We chunk these parts into individual pieces of text, and then we create a batch of jobs which are processed in the background. Before they were performed, we move the content of the subtitle file into the cache so that we can work on them, and then afterwards we move the cached subtitle queues into a file. Of course, we don't want to have all of these job workers open a file every time they want to get a piece of text, because only one process can open or obtain the lock for a file at one time. So it would make it a lot slower than just moving the whole subtitle file contents as a set of queues, as a set of pieces of text, into our Redis store for them to be worked on. I think that's a basic explanation of that process. And then afterwards, or while those things are happening, we show a holding page which displays the current state of the subtitle conversion, and we use WebSockets to communicate the progress of that process. We'll get back to this in a moment, but I can demonstrate that process. I upload a example subtitle file. I can choose between English, which it is detected is the language of that original subtitle file, and the second language. So I'm going to pick French here. You notice the text of the website is Italian because I'm on the Italian version of this website. Now this is the show conversion template, and this message is basically asking us to wait until the translation has started. If we waited a moment here, we would see that this progress bar starts to fill. Now let's make some progress. Now that I've demonstrated the functionality, let's make some progress of copying that UI. Not for a subtitle file that you upload yourself, but for a subtitle file which we have retrieved from the Open Subtitle API. That still hasn't started, which is interesting. It's definitely busy working. Maybe the WebSocket events haven't gone off. But as you can see here, we have 6 queue workers for the conversion queue. They're basically PHP processes that are dedicated to this task of converting the files. Yeah. So let's get some work done. We want to copy this over, store the upload, but instead of getting it from the request, we're getting it from the file that we've just saved. So I'm not actually sure. what the method is for getting the file back out of storage. Let's not be lazy. Get. Now, because we have cached the response from the API here, it doesn't really matter if we make a few requests to this endpoint to check our code as we go along, because we're only going to be making one request to the API. Yeah, not sure what's going on there. Wonderful. We've got the contents of the file. Now we may not, the name of the file right, we're storing the file by its ID, by its file ID. We obviously want a more descriptive name, because when we give the person the opportunity to download their converted subtitle file, it uses it also uses the format of the subtitle media's name, the title of the media, like the name of the movie, dash en dash fr or dash fr dash es for English and French subtitles, and Spanish and French subtitles respectively. So we want to either store the file or provide a name which is more descriptive. Let's see if we see the file name. That's descriptive enough. But we will need to change. We don't just want to store the download link, we want to store that whole object for the response. File ID, download info. Download link. Response and response. Now we can use the Redis client, hopefully, to delete, because unlike with the other cached methods here, I haven't added a parameter to forcefully refresh the cached value. So I'm going to have to delete subtitle file. Actually, that's some old cached information. Okey-doke. see if we have more descriptive information we can use. Here we go. Your quota will be renewed in 22 hours and 22 minutes. Wonderful. So I'm going to use the file name. File contents. Let's create a subtitle model record. Subtitle file size. I do believe there is a function. There we go. To get the size. File size. Import these enums. Yes. Now the nice thing here is because we don't need to create the subtitles to get the UUIDs of the subtitles. Yes, to then use the UUID of the subtitle conversion as the name of the file, we don't need to split this into 4 different queries. We can make it into 2. So, see, this is exactly the type of thing that Copilot is created for. There we go. Original path. Subtitle conversion. File size. Wonderful. Now, unlike manually uploaded subtitles, we have some information around feature IDs and a feature model. So I'm going to use to create one of those. Feature create. Unfortunately, we might need to copy. we might need to copy some of the logic from here to get more detailed information about a feature from the API. I don't know if you can hear my laundry machine over my earphones. Perhaps you can, but hopefully it's not too distracting. Perhaps it's more entertaining than my voice while I'm coding, but who knows. I'm wondering how I can get the feature ID from this request without passing it through as a parameter of the URL signature. Unfortunately, I might need to. Great. So let's do this. DD request. And change this so that subtitle would create. Requires these pieces of information. Let's see if that works. It's quite complicated, relatively complicated regex for the root handler to figure out. So hopefully that just works smoothly, as most things with Laravel do. Especially with this second parameter here being not required or optional. Catalog show. One thing I did notice is that with this being null, I got an error message, or had an error message, unless I placed the dependency injected instance of Open Subtitle service before those parameters. So I hope I don't have the same issue here. Thank you, Copilot. That was a very useful comment. So, yeah. Something that make this whole process an awful lot easier. Just basically leverage the code performed here to ensure that there's only one potential feature, whether it's the parent when there is no child, or whether it's the child when there is a parent. I can leverage that by just using the ID of the potential feature and ignoring the ID of the potential parent feature ID. So I seem to have made it accidentally. There we go. ID. Do do do. I chose to wake up early and actually get some progress done on this project, rather than staying up late and then being tired from my day job. So, smart decision in my view. Feature ID, subtitle file ID. Let's go. Stop. I'm just going to turn that off. It's very annoying. Ironically, much like Blade Runner 2049, which I haven't yet watched, but I've seen plenty of memes about, the IDE is just becoming full of distractions. When you actually try to get something done, you have things presented in front of you that you have very little interest of, just like people have adverts in these cyberpunk universes put in front of their faces with VR goggles and holograms, which seem cool, but you know would inevitably be used for immersive advertising. Perfect name for such a thing. Let's see if this works. Nope. I wonder. All could be giving me the contents of the request body or input and files. I want root. There we go. Can we do all or get? Let's just feature ID and open subtitle. Let's just copy this. Hey, one of them is a string and one of them is a number. That's very interesting. Oh, it's because I've casted it, so well done me. Great stuff. Now let's get more information about the feature. That would be my washing machine you're hearing. Enjoy. Now let's DD the potential feature and see what information we can get from it. That says Italia Ing. I sure hope the file actually has English subtitles inside it. Now see what information we can leverage when creating our feature. We're not going to use a description. We are going to use another use of AI. Potential feature. Original title. perfect place to use empty, which will return true if it's falsy and or if it is an empty string. OS ID. Now, that's the feature ID, but I'm curious whether it would have made sense to pass in the parent feature ID. Create feature is the user. Oh, Jesus Christ. The user ID. We want to be able to allow people to upload or to choose features from the Open Subtitles API rather than by their manual upload, which we're describing as the catalog, without being logged in. And that would require that the user ID allow nullable values, so we may need to remigrate the database from fresh. Nullable. Yeah, can't wait to play with that. To do. Are they optional? No, they are not. They should be. Most of these things are not nullable by default, but they really should be nullable. This should be OS type. This should be OS feature. Feature. OS type. Feature ID. Cool. To do handle in the future. Massively optimistic. That was my phone. Potential feature, feature ID. That was me burping. Feature type. GURL. I've written some logic in a project that I'd previously worked on using the Open Subtitles API called Series Word Freq. That's FREQ for frequency, where I determined the URL for IMDb and TMDb, and it is a total pain in the behind. So I will copy paste that JavaScript logic and refactor it into PHP. But for now, poster. Do we have a poster? Yes, we do. See, this is perfect use of interesting. I wonder if that's a JSON column. It ought to be. Now, this is a perfect use of the GitHub Copilot tool. I didn't realize I have distinct columns for these things. I don't think I really need to, but it's always good to keep as much information as we can. Sweet. Now let's rebuild our PHP artisan migrate fresh seed. You'll see I've modified the dev command quite substantially from what's included by default in the Laravel boilerplate to include 6 instances of the qwork command using the conversion view for our convenience. And because the translation process can be quite it's quite inconsistent in how much time it takes to do the translation based on the complexity of the language. I've noticed that Spanish and French translate quite quickly, but Chinese and Arabic, for example, translate quite slowly in comparison. So I've set timeout equals 0 because we want to give it an unlimited amount of time, and tries equals 1 because if it fails after one attempt, we're going to display an error message to the user, and they can click a button and retry. Let's see. String to. I did mention, I wonder if well, that's another problem. I wonder which field is the one causing the problem. Array to string conversion. Question. OS title API. Yes, I do suspect that's the one that's causing the problem. And/or it's OS episode index, which I suspect is null. Integer nullable. That shouldn't be a problem. Feature. There we go. It was missing casting. And that is a JSON object, serialized, or a JSON array serialized. No season or episode information because it's a movie. And if I do try on a TV show, Black Mirror, excellent series, National Anthem, excellent episode. Great stuff. For some reason, Open Subtitles API doesn't return null or some empty value when there's no poster to be displayed. It instead returns a path containing the term no poster, which is interesting. Perhaps on their website or their handler of static assets, if the URL of the path contains no poster, it returns some sort of a placeholder. I have no idea. In the future, it would be quite useful to store the parent information or retrieve the poster from the parent ID, because otherwise we don't really have a poster to display. I do suspect that the reason there is a black mirror poster here is because we're retrieving it from the parent's feature information returned from the API and not from the child's information returned from the API. Yeah. You know, because it's my first time recording a video, or recording my work being done, I'm going to quickly pause and then restart recording, because I'm not quite sure how long this program I'm using, which is CleanShot X. I'm not quite sure for how long it will record for in a single file, and I wouldn't want to lose all of this wonderful and entertaining footage. So just a moment. I'm back. Okie doke. And as explained in the diagram when we started working on this, I do believe we can associate a subtitle with a feature ID. There isn't a relationship with function subtitles. Am I going to regret this? Nope. Nice. Now let's 942. Now let's create a language selection screen. Check that this file is full of Arabic. Yes, it is. You know, I'm going to commit it how it is now, because you don't want to lose your progress. No, don't need that. It should be in the get_ignore file. Yes, it is. That's okay. Added Italian. It was missing. I did plenty of changes to that. sure it is all wonderful. If I've added anything I didn't intend to add, it will become apparent in time. Add subtitle catalog. There was some internal debate as to whether to use the British spelling of catalogue or to use the perhaps more widely accepted American spelling of catalogue. I typically use the American spelling of words like colour and centre only because when you're working with frameworks and this sort of thing and programming languages, they typically choose the American spelling. But for catalogue, I've chosen the British spelling. American catalogue, create. Root. Cool. Now the next step. I copied this code from direct response from the subtitle controller. I want to close the others in the group. Never mind. I want to copy the catalog, create language selection. I do wonder why we're not providing the UUID of the subtitle conversion as a root parameter when we're making a redirect, but it's not used as part of the root signature. I suppose we will find out. Maybe I determined maybe I determined that it was redundant. Well, thank you. Function. This is going to be very, very similar, near duplicate code. One important difference will be I was going to say one important difference would be that the original language the language which we're detecting from the original subtitles contents could be any language. But now that we've limited the available languages that you can select from, it will be basically the same function. Get the first subtitle conversion. That's why we don't need to provide it. Okie doke. I wonder for how long that will work. Should I add a comment to fix it in the future, or should I just fix it now? I'm amazed it's the first time that we've imported that model, but I suppose we were using the relationship before, so it shouldn't be surprising. See, the reason we really need to fix this in the future. There may be more than one conversion for a subtitle. Thank you, Copilot. I totally periodically go through the code base to do comments to see which ones I can finish off. That's something I totally do. Create language selection. There we go. So we get the first 5 and then the first 10 if needed. Are we actually using the first 5? Are we only using the first 5 for demonstration? And we're using the first 10 to predict which language the subtitles are in. Yeah, we need to add an error message. There are so many things that need to be done. But MVP, minimum viable product, exists for a reason. And I am still unsure / skeptical as to whether this will be a profitable service to offer. So I would like to get it finished as quickly as possible. Language A, language B, yada yada. Let's DD this because obviously we don't have a template to render yet. Request has, it needs to be remove that one. So it's determined that it's an Arabic file. The second language, the default value it's chosen is German. We have the subtitle file with the uploaded file, hasn't yet been converted, the status is pending. Estimated original language is Arabic. Available target languages are, if you want a subtitle file which has Arabic subtitles above Arabic subtitles, that is an option. So it would be quite nice if we could add a bracket, original language, end bracket, around the name of the language, the original language of the subtitle media. Maybe that would make the drop down box a bit too wide if it was Chinese brackets traditional brackets original. Merged queues. So that's a lazy inertia parameter. It only gets rendered after, or it only gets determined or calculated after the initial render of the inertia template, which is quite useful. And our localized strings. Wonderful. I do wonder, because everything is so similar here, is it best to just redirect people to the existing controller methods and redirect them to the existing router endpoints? That would make our job an awful lot easier. Yes, I think so. You know, when you have a choice between adding duplicate code and adding complication and simplifying something, it's always better to go with the simplified option. That would be quite useful in the future. Catalog. I understand why we're only using in a RESTful way, the way that URLs are typically structured by the RESTful standard. We're only referring to the subtitle resource because we're only changing a property or a column in the subtitles database, the languages column. We're not really changing a column in the subtitle conversions table. in a database. But assuming that, or perhaps we are. No, we're not. Yeah, screw it. No, we're not. Um, mm, by no, we're not, I do mean yes, we are. We're only changing the subtitle, the languages column in the subtitles table, and we're not making any changes to the subtitle conversion. We're only using the subtitle conversion when we're pulling the trigger on the process subtitle conversion process. Right, let's get this going. It's 3:30 in the morning. Perfect. I want English, so it should translate from Arabic to English. Black Mirror, that's a good start. I do actually remember the start of this episode, so it's interesting to see after many years the text of the things. I believe it's the Prime Minister who answers a phone call, and it's why don't you tell me what happened? A princess has been kidnapped. That's what's happened. It's cool and fun. Let's see why. Hey, it's working now. It's working quickly. Jesus Christ! I believe we have implemented the selecting a subtitle from the catalog from the Open Subtitles Service API and converting it into two languages. I see. This is the hedonic, the dopamine treadmill. You spend multiple hours just iterating, iterating, and iterating, and trying to find the solutions to errors and boringly writing lines of code. And eventually, you have these kind of so much work and then a bit of reward. And it is joyous. It does make those multiple hours of just toiling at bits of code. It does definitely make it worth it when you see the results of your work. This is wonderful, and I'm happy that you guys, whether maybe it's been a little boring, or maybe you just had me on in the background, or you're falling asleep, or I have no idea. It's exciting to see that I've been able to bring people along while I'm tapping away at my keyboard and getting frustrated. So thank you for joining me. And I'm very, very happy that I've remembered to press the record button, because God forbid. Let's see if this actually works. I will be so excited if this works. You have no idea. Because then we can do the search box, and then it is done. It is done. Un Deux-Titres, and not Deux-Titres, as a project will hopefully be done. And then we can add some authentication add email handling for verification for the authentication using people's emails. We could add Stripe integration, and then because there are costs related to the running the translation server, running the app server, and running the requests to the Open Subtitle API to get the subtitle contents. I will add Stripe integration and/or advertising, very subtle advertising, to this translation page at the very bottom, so that I can recoup a bit of the cost for running the service, and then perhaps market it in a few places I have in mind, and then the project is done. And it's also because if you've given me the opportunity to share something, share some work, share my IDE, share my insights about AI tools with anybody listening. So thank you very much again. Let's open this file and see if it actually works. See, this is the result of the code which is displayed as the result of a translation. We could switch it to God darn English American, and you can see the result. First, download your translated subtitles file. We will see if it actually contains anything of use. It could just be an empty file, and then we can cry together. In the past, I'd just be crying on my own, but now I'm crying on my own with earphones in my ears. Open the movie or TV show in your favorite media player. VLC is my favorite because you can literally just drag the file into the VLC window. QuickTime isn't great because, as you'll see in the next step, you need to merge the media file with the subtitle file, which just seems way to keep it simple, Apple. And the Windows Media Player is an interesting option because you need to have, as described here, you need to have a media file which has the same name as your subtitle file, so you can't have multiple subtitle files for different languages, which is a great idea. And I added a screenshot of a really terrible example of when you would use this. Watching a piece of English media with a second language, when surely the most useful application of this service would be watching a foreign piece of media with English subtitles added in addition to subtitles for the actual spoken text. So glorious. But it's quite a nice UI, and I will tell you a bit of an inside scoop. Much of this UI, for as much as I decry the AI generation tools, much of this UI was created using v0.dev, which is a AI tool which will generate, or at least claims to generate, a front-end design. It's very good. It's very good if you get an account and give it a try. It's very good at creating a concept, an actionable concept, as a set of React components. If you have build me a to-do list app, the world's most obvious question to ask such a service, I would have to log into my Vercel account, but I do recommend giving it a play around. You can create a landing page or a sign-up form. It's worth giving a play around. So let's see what's in this file. Promising. See, the problem is I don't actually have this episode of Black Mirror for me to open in VLC alongside the subtitles. But for my memory of the episode, this is exactly this sort of text. Michael Callow. the Prime Minister in this episode. This is exactly the text in English and French, translated from Arabic, respectively, exactly the text which is displayed. So, if you had an Arabic copy of this episode, you could have subtitles that were both English and French, translated from Arabic. So this is perfect. I think it's taking a few jumps with the translation, but that's perfectly fine. See, the dopamine is definitely hitting at 3:30 in the morning. Let's commit it before we accidentally delete all the files. You know I'll have to do it. Whee! I've just realised a very interesting insight. Not only am I wasting my own time there, which would be fine in my book, I'm now wasting other people's time. So I will refrain from doing such things in the future. Use existing language selection and conversion routes for catalog functionality. I should also try it with a movie because the root signatures are slightly different. And then we will have a go at the search box so we can search a TV show or movie. Creative titles. Has anyone watched the Minecraft movie? Is it any good? No. Perfect piece of functionality we can implement. Error handling. I might add some sort of toast and then return back with a error. Yes. Great example though. So it's good when we find an error so that we can use it to test the solution to an error. That's pretty great. Funny enough, I did actually find a similar error with a subtitle file for the film Limitless, which if you haven't watched, I definitely recommend. I do suspect that the drug that they're referencing, the experimental drug, is modafinil in real life, or is a exaggerated parallel to the nootropic drug modafinil, which, from personal experience, I can definitely testify as nothing like the cartoonish effect demonstrated in the movie Limitless. I do suspect that that's what they're referring to. Let's find subtitle controller 90. Create language selection. The controller. Well, it's not that one. There we go. Now, is that an exception? Yes, it is. So, I don't really want it to display the private path of a path of my file system, but I do want it to in the error message display to the user. But I do want it to display that it's not a proper SRT file. I wish it wasn't an exception that was thrown, but instead was a custom exception class for the captioning library that we're using. It's literally a library called captioning-captioning. It's very good. It basically handles the conversion of a subtitle file into a class which can be interacted with. We can get certain cues, we can make changes to the milliseconds affecting different cues. It's quite good. And it does that for multiple different subtitle formats. I believe this package is used by some pretty big sites. So yeah, that's why I chose to use it. Let's see if it is a custom class. No, it is not. I don't like using a single character for a variable name. I know it's obvious in this case, but it does create the standard, or it does create the possibility that someone might use like SC for subtitle conversion or LTS. That's a very realistic misuse of abbreviation, using LTS for Libre Translate Service, and then a new developer comes along and they have no idea what LTS stands for. So I like to be as verbose as I can when it comes to variable names, which I know must frustrate some of my co-workers, but I do believe I'm doing it for a good reason. I believe we can use str contains now, but I'm not entirely sure. I prefer to use str to be older. Alright, haystack is not a proper false. Are we good using that? Yeah. We should add localized strings here. Yeah. For now, I'm going to use just a string, and then I'm going to add a to-do comment saying that we need to add localization. That's something incredibly boring, so I might not record it. Incredibly repetitive, by which I mean boring. And to do add localization again. Am I feeling traditional or am I feeling aspirational? An error occurred when reading this subtitle file. Please try another one. Thank you. Nah, it's a bit much. I'll say valid subtitle. Please try another one. Return, redirect, back with errors. Sweet. Now, by back, it's going back to the same page. So we need to handle the error message, displaying it somewhere. So this is where you start forgetting what different routes do. And if you start forgetting what they do a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes after writing them, you can only imagine how quickly people forget what different routes or different areas of an application do after a week or a month or a year. So that's why good documentation is a good idea. The create endpoint creates the models and then redirects. Great. Would that cause an infinite loop because it's going from create language selection back to create, and then this endpoint is redirected to create language selection? Let's have a look. Nope. That's I'm happy about that. Now let's see if I cannot remember. Is it session? Request session? I don't know. Or request flash? Jesus. I'm going to look at the Laravel documentation on the best way of doing this. See, I know typically you would add the session to the inertia, handle inertia requests, default props that are provided to the template. So you could just say props dot session.errors or props.errors and then show them. Maybe that's what we need to do. Session. See, that's the sort of thing we need to do. Request session. We want to add some sort of UI, some sort of toast to the top. Errors. I know that use memo isn't really required, and some people debate. It's only really useful for if your value being returned by use memo is computationally expensive. Yeah, and some people debate whether using use memo, the calculation that needs to be done to determine whether you need to run a use memo or need to re-render the results of a use memo callback is in fact more computationally expensive than just re-rendering the little piece of HTML, the little piece of DOM tree, which is being re-rendered each time. But in this particular case, it's the style of code I chose to use. So I understand the criticism. Page props. I might need to change this to record of string rather than string, but we will find out when we console log. Errors, page, props. Let's see what's returned. Should have opened this first. Props. Errors is already injected. Well, I'm thankful, even if I'm not sure where it's coming from. Errors. Page props. Errors. Record. Sweet. If objects keys let's do it efficiently. Errors object trees.errors. If errors.length is less than 1, cool. Not bad. I would prefer it to persist the scroll and add the error message in context, within the context of which button you clicked. But for now, it will do the job. Biggest sandbox in the universe. Oh my god. The open world. My Minecraft server will last for 1,000 years. Cool. Good to know. Ooh. This here is used by multiple pages, including not just the catalog show page here, it's also going to result in an error and redirect back to this page. So let's handle that. Let's manually throw. Wonderful. Let's manually throw an exception message. Looks like we've already handled it. This is not a valid subtitle file. Please try another one. Looks like we've already thought of that earlier. But it's good to be careful. Add error handling where it was missing. Now I will complete the last piece of functionality in the catalog UI, and that's this search box here. A person should be able to type in the name of a movie or TV show episode, and we should have a paginated list of results. Now, thankfully, the Open Subtitles API provides us with a search endpoint, so this should be pretty simple. I suspect the full search parameter here, which I've used in the past, provides fuzzy search or search based on the start of the name matching the query value. We will soon find out. There we go. Text search or autocomplete. Wonderful. Yeah, they don't want us smashing their API. Oh, I see. Full search doesn't have anything to do with fuzzy search. It has to do with also searching with translations. So I'll definitely turn that on. Catalog index. Now, when someone we need to check typically I would check if and then do there should be a code, but I suspect it's because we are not hinting a type. There we go. Handle search import. Submit. Now if we do we should, when we press the enter key, nope. Let's open our console and see what's going on. Maybe they want us to do key equals enter like that, but we will find out. because I know that key code is deprecated as hinted um, by the strike through in the IntelliSense. The enter key doesn't seem to be causing the input event, which is interesting. Yet enter key input. I would use on key down as this person is suggesting, but what if there are other ways of indicating that you're done with the field? I can't think of any right now, but typically you would have a button next to the input, which native event. Yeah, typically you'd have a button next to the input that says like search, but I wanted to make it a bit more fluid. Maybe I ought to, just to make it more usable, as they would say. Makes sense. Well, see, this is why I wanted to make it a bit more elegant, just having an input field and relying on the person knowing that they need to press the enter key. But of course, you cannot always assume that people will know how to use your app. Native event current target dot value and come on. And the nice thing of getting the nice effect of using event.currentTarget.value is that we can have a uncontrolled input box. So rather, instead of doing value equals search input value and then on change, there we go. We're using a use effect, a use state to control the value of the input field. We can just retrieve its value when we submit. If we have a button, we either need to contain the whole thing inside a form and then get the state from the form, or we need to use a controlled input field, which has its downsides. A very dirty way of doing this is exactly what GitHub Copilot is suggesting here, and it's quite a dirty way of doing it, because if the structure of the DOM were to change here, you would not be able to retrieve a value. But as it's not likely to change, and it's exactly what I'm tempted to do, I'm going to take GitHub Copilot suggestion. Mouse event. Is that mouse event from React or mouse event from the DOM? The internal set of typings for JavaScript DOM. We want to use the one from React, although they're named similarly. HTML button element. As unknown as. What does it want it to be? Because I don't really care. Interesting. It's not actually my custom on click here. Isn't actually passing anything in. Thrilling. Does it work? Yep. Brill. Now we want to visit. In fact, get is the default when we use .visit. We don't want to preserve the state. We don't want to preserve the scroll. We want to navigate to a new page. It should give us an error that the route here isn't available. Perfect. And it also shouldn't do anything if the value is null and every value, there we go, is empty. Now we need to very quickly create a new view which displays the results of a search. I accidentally quit VS Code because I pressed Command Q instead of Command 1 to hide the side pane. No, I don't want to inject my hard drive. These are easily made mistakes. And by the way, this super-powered command space spotlight replacement is called Raycast, and it's very impressive. It's very cool. You can install lots of different extensions and lots of different functionality into it. It's quite cool. So click function search. I pressed the correct key then. Root. It's quite a simple route compared to the other ones because I'm going to pass the query as a get parameter. Let's see if this works. It probably won't work. Request. I'll have to get it from the request. Now the reason, interestingly, the response doesn't return, we don't get an error because this function isn't returning a response, is because DD returns the special type never. It's I'll leave it to you to have a look at the documentation, but it's a very interesting special PHP type. Which basically invalidates any other return expectations because nothing will be returned from this function. This is the end of the execution of the interpreted program. Matrix. Seems to work. Now we need to, there we go, get cached using the consistent terminology that we've established of get cached, mapping to get, and then the term without the word cached. Features by search term. Search results. Now, because it will eventually be paginated, we also want to get the page number. It interprets the coding style from the rest of the functions, and it sees the consistent pattern between get cached something and get something and method names. So let's see if it will autocomplete much of the rest. Search for features, v1/features, awesome. Language. When I search for features, am I passing a language? Yes, I am. So that's okay. Query, not search. I assume the response is paginated. Doesn't seem to be clear from the documentation. Search for a feature. So does that mean the search results will only be a single feature? I've used this in the past for the Word Serious WordFreak project. I'm pretty sure it returns multiple features. We will find out, I suppose. Indeed it does. Nice. Now I want to copy. This is exactly something that V0 would be quite good at. I want to copy the designs of the cards here into a new page. Let's see if we can get Copilot or V0 to do it. Feature. May just be faster to do it ourselves. Could have used a duplicate button. I will use a duplicate button. I've clearly copied this block of code from the welcome page. I might have copied this whole file from the welcome page, and that's why I'm using welcome page props for the index page. That should be catalog index page props. Catalog index page props. I'm not using this animated marquee in this file, so I can remove it. I tend to separate JavaScript imports from CSS imports. add some error handling. Add localization, add error message display on catalog index. You know, I might use empty because if there's an error, null will be returned. But if there is a data key with an array that happens to be empty, that array will be returned. So in that case, there will be no error, but there will be no results found, which is exactly what this error message is for. So is it actually returning the data? That's what we want. Don't want a carousel, do want everything else. I was right the first time. Props.searchresults.map. Search results for is it really needed? Are we overcomplicating this? To do add localization. Search results. Search results.map is not a function. Oh, interesting. I thought I resolved this issue. Ah, it's because I've cached it. Let's refresh it, and then there we go. Now I can, and beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Maybe it's best for me to split it by either change the sorting to something more relevant, or still split it into TV shows and TV series, but not TV series episodes or TV show episodes, because that's what seems to be jamming up. I really just want those. How do I filter out the trash, I wonder? Hey. I do wonder if this is an issue of a parent feature or child feature. Missing a poster. Basically, I need to. Yeah, it's not an issue of a child because it's not a TV show, it's a movie. What I might do is, as a temporary fix, index of a poster assets is over -1, so it contains that piece of text. Because if it didn't contain that piece of text, it would be -1. If it was at the start of the piece of text, which it ought to be, in this case, it would be 0, and if it's within the piece of text, it would be over 0. Div Order. Found it. Beautiful. Need to fix the alignment, but it will do as a temporary solution, I do believe. There we go. Item start on the grid. You know, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. And it doesn't work. Hey, it does work. Can we go through the whole workflow of converting? Jesus, it's slow. Oh my lord, come on. Why, of course it exceeded. You know, I can't really complain when most of this API, 90% of this API, is free to use and isn't subject to quotas outside of this operation, getting the contents of a subtitle file. So I can't really complain. I do need better error handling. I need some sort of Kanban board. I need better error handling for this sort of scenario. See, the nice thing about caching everything that we get from the API is that this page reloads very fast. Maybe they're deploying changes to the Open Subtitles API, but I would assume as everything else in the basically all we've changed is how we access this page. We've already created a dual subtitle conversion through the workflow that starts at this page. So yeah, I would assume everything works, but I will definitely test it later on in the day. Well, good to find an error before it enters production now, because we can definitely improve how this error is handled. Well, thank you for following me along. If you've watched the whole thing, it's pretty incredible. Coming around, I suspect around 3 hours. So thank you for following along as I finish off the catalog section of the functionality for the Deux-Titres website. Well, thank you very much for watching.